So, Pride and Prejudice, we've been talking about unconscious bias and subconscious bias. I don't want to recap everything, but here's a little meme I ran into on the internet, and I think it's a great example of unconscious bias. As you can see, it says, "You feel alive to the degree that you feel you can help others." And it looks like a wonderful little meme. And very inspiring, very encouraging. And yet, what's wrong with this picture? Of course, hopefully you noticed it. All the brown hands are asking for help, and the white hand is the only one offering help. And this was on the internet. I mean, it was just on there. People are posting it, and this is a perfect example of unconscious or subconscious bias. And even I remember I noticed that at one point I'd noticed that a series of pictures had come out, and it was always a white person holding a brown baby or a black baby or, you know, an Asian baby. And it was never anything different. And I encourage the organization to please show the different, that I know there are many brown people, many Asian people, many black people, many people of all colors out there serving. How about some pictures of them holding those babies or other babies? And so it's not just one way. And, you know, unconscious bias, and I did talk about this already a little bit, it leaks out into viewing the world in tribalism, my people versus your people, us versus them, the stereotypes, very much promotes, and stereotypes can be positive or negative, typically negative. And when a person is hurt, they pretty much all become negative. And just to say that, you know, that because sometimes we think, oh, but that's a positive stereotype. It could be even a positive stereotype, but sometimes people just don't want to be typecast. People just don't want to be pigeonholed. They don't want to be put in a compartment. You know, you say, well, all Mexicans are family oriented. You know, and that in my mind, that's a positive stereotype. And most are. It's based on a lot of truth. Not all of them are, that's for sure. But some people might resent that just because they just don't want to be stereotyped. They just don't want to be put in a box and prejudged. Sexism, you know, this is probably, you know, one of the topics that we least have talked about, that we're going to need to talk more about. And as we grow in our understanding and grow in our ability to learn from each other, prejudice, you know, prejudging people. We see them, we judge them. We react by sight because we've got preconceived notions. And again, it's very important we understand that we all have these. All of us do. There's nobody that doesn't have these. Those who are people of color will feel this much stronger because it's a majority prejudging them. And those that are the majority feel it much less because it's only a small minority. And it's not the power players in most cases. There are exceptions to that. But discrimination, you know, when people are blocked in some way because of this. And this all oftentimes happens in here. And I've used personal examples because obviously they're personal and I know them. And by no means am I trying to say that my experience is worse than others. Many people have worse experiences, but I can tell when people talk to me. You can tell when they're talking down to you, and everybody can pick that up. You know, I remember being a young man at one of my early jobs, and this woman came up and said, "Can you come clean office?" You know, in a very loud voice. And of course I said, "Sure, what time do you want me to go over there?" And she, you know, shocked because she assumed I didn't speak English. She assumed, and for some reason, people always feel like they've got to yell if they think you don't speak English. Somehow, not speaking English and being deaf go together. But and then of course there's just plain old racism, and that's when somebody has bought into it. They believe it. They believe the lies. They believe the superiority. They believe the fear. They have bought into it. And there's a wide range here, and that's important to understand, that it can be from just super hateful to polite, but it's still racism. and it's all there. And one of the things that I've talked about in these workshops is the difference between racism, prejudice, and ignorance. And I think it is important to understand the difference because the intent is important. Is it an ignorant? Are somebody speaking out of ignorance? Is somebody speaking out of prejudging, which has more to do with pride? Or is somebody speaking out of racism, which has more to do with fear and pride and hatred? Racism, these are just Webster's dictionary definitions. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Obviously, that's just a blatant sin. But again, as I said earlier, that can range. There are people that are subtly, I would even say, generally good-hearted people who mean well can still be racist. I remember a really tough talk I had with somebody who devoted much of their life to helping children in poor neighborhoods in Latin America. And I realized by the comments that this person really looked at them as inferior beings, as almost like, these little brown people. And he never said that, but it would leak out, comment after comment after comment. This person was really devoted to helping and serving and giving. And when we tried to have a talk about it, it didn't go well at all. And this person felt like I was accusing them and labeling them. But there was no doubt in my mind that it was there. And so sometimes, we think that, well, if racism is just on the evil intent. No, it's not. Sometimes we just don't know we're doing it. And that's why the dialogues that we're having are so important. Prejudice, more action of another in disregard of one's rights. Irrational attitude directed against an individual, a group, a race, or their supposed characteristics. The irrational is probably the key word, that it's prejudging. It's judging off a movie or judging off a past experience. You don't know the person, you know nothing about the person, and we draw conclusions because of their race, because of their social standing. And I mean, this can go gender. We think, oh, she's weak and emotional because she's a woman, or she can't, do this because she's a woman, or so. That's just as prejudicial as anything. Or because this person is black, or because this person's white, they're not going to get it, or whatever. But those that's a very real thing, of course. And then there's ignorance. It's just not knowing. It's just they don't know. No ill intent, no hatred, no fear, just I'm ignorant and I say things and I don't realize that I'm insulting somebody, or I don't realize the prejudice that's in my comment, or the racism even that's in my comment. But those are important. Racism, I hate, I fear you because you are whatever. Prejudice, you must be from a broken home because you're, let me say this about prejudice, about judgment. And I think we're going to be talking and doing some studies. I know Michelle is planning on talking. I think we're going to have to do several talks on this. It's so important for right now that we learn from each other, and therefore we must hear one another. And therefore we must be able to talk to one another and share what's really on our hearts. And we can't shut each other down because we're afraid of what each other might say. Or we can't shut each other down because if somebody says the wrong thing, they're in big trouble. We have to not judge. We have to if somebody's expressing their hurt from racism and they express anger, we can't shut it down because, oh, no, I don't want somebody angry at me. I didn't do this on purpose. That wasn't me, or whatever. We can't shut it down. We need to let it be shared. That's how we process things. Likewise, if we have questions about racism, we have to be able to ask them without feeling like, what if I say the wrong thing and then I'm, labeled or slammed because I said something insulting. So what this conversation that needs to happen, and continue happening. It's not a one-time talk. We've had several in the region, and we're going to need several more. And this conversation has to be able to run its course so that we can learn from each other. So it means that we cannot judge each other, you know, and even if the judgment is correct, even if it's correct, we might feel like, well, that person seems kind of bitter. Well, maybe they are, but the only way they're going to work through that is by talking and being able to get some things off their chest and listen to another perspective and get a rounder, you know, get healed. You know, there are people walking around with decades of pain and suffering. It's not just going to go away like that, you know, and I know that some of us are scared to death to ask questions because we are so scared that we're going to make a mistake or say something wrong. And this is where love has to overpower all that. And we can't judge each other. We have to be able to listen to each other. And again, even if the judgment's right, well, he just doesn't get it. Maybe he doesn't, but we still got to love each other. We still got to help each other, you know, or, well, that person just seems bitter. Maybe they are, but we still got to love each other and help that person work through their bitterness or work through their pain. And we can't judge like, oh, well, I wouldn't be bitter if it happened to me. How do you know? You know, or I wouldn't be scared to ask if I was in that person's shoes. How do you know? You don't. We don't know. We don't know each other's pain. We don't know each other's fears. We don't know what is going on in each other's hearts. The heart is deceitful above all things. No one can understand it except who? God. So in order to have that dialogue that we have to have so that we can learn from one another, we cannot judge one another. We have to be very gracious, very merciful, very patient with one another. And what we'll get out of that is a much deeper, richer understanding and a much deeper, richer love. And let me tell you, I think all of us are feeling different levels of anxiety about all this. And of course, the easier thing to do is just say, you know what, forget it. I'm out of here. Forget you all. Figure it out yourselves. It takes a lot of love to hang in there. It takes a lot of love to not quit on each other, to just keep listening, to keep, you know, and if you've got to keep apologizing, keep apologizing. If you've got to keep saying things over again, keep saying it, just to help one another, to help each other move forward together as a family. And so we'll talk more about judgment and judging each other because I think there's some really helpful scriptures. I know Michelle's going to provide some great help on that, and I'll do what I can. So, but I had to camp out there for a second because I'm really concerned about that right now, that we not shut each other down, that we not judge one another. Ignorance, of course, you know. Don't your people eat tortillas? You know, I think I gave this example. There was a movie it was a Christian movie. I think it was the Fireproof or something like that. And they had this couple, and I knew they were Puerto Rican by their accents, but they were supposed to be Mexican. And she opens the refrigerator and takes out a tortilla in a package and hands it to her husband as lunch. And, you know, and all the Mexicans are dying because they're like, you don't hand a cold tortilla out of the refrigerator to somebody that you love or care about. You heat it up, you cook it, and you make it for them. But a Puerto Rican wouldn't know that because Puerto Ricans don't eat tortillas unless they live in California, but or, you know, love Mexican food. But generally speaking, that's not their culture. So they wouldn't know that. Now, that's a totally benign example. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody gets insulted. But it's an example of just how we just don't know. We don't know. You know, when we moved to Miami, I realized that even though Miami, color-wise, there's a very large black population, yet African Americans were a minority in that group. There were so many Haitians, Dominicans, other islanders, Jamaicans, that even African Americans were a minority in the black population, at least in the area that we lived. So it was like, oh, wow. I mean, it was cultural awareness. It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing. And, you know, and honestly, love would dictate, look, when I stick my foot in my mouth, I'm going to own it and apologize for it. And everybody does it. Everybody does it all the way, big back and forth, front and back, you know, and lots of studies have shown how it's the more different a race or a cultural group is from us, the harder it is for us to catch the differences, to note the differences. When I was a little kid and my mom remarried, she married an Irishman, and I remember he would come to our house, and we were a very traditional Mexican family. He would bring a couple of friends over, and they'd come over and they'd hang out at our house, and they'd eat with us and everything. And I honestly couldn't tell them apart. I didn't know which one was my mom's boyfriend because they just looked alike to me. And I'd never been around white people. And so these tall, thin white guys, I couldn't tell you which one was Dan and which one was Frank and which one was Mike. They just seemed, it took me a while to get used to it. Why? Because my eyes were not trained or were not used to looking at Caucasian faces. And that happens on many levels for us. There's lots of studies, the difference between even prejudice and racism, having the preconceived. The way I boil it down really is prejudice has a lot to do with pride, and racism has pride and fear, a lot more fear mixed in there with it. And that's where the hate comes from. That's where the actions and the evil comes from. Instead of rejoicing in differences and loving each other, we give into our fears, and it's easy to vilify that which is different. And again, everybody does it. And but there's no doubt that there are certain communities that have suffered by far more than others, African American community being one, probably the one that's the most suffered. Obviously, if you go down to a reservations, or Native Americans would have a lot to say about this, and Jewish people would have a lot to say about this. They have 5,000 years of recorded history of suffering and persecution. So I could never say that what I went through or what my people have gone through is the same as any of those categories. But we each have our own, right? Much of this revolves around equity. What is fair? Treating each other fair. I mean, what people are marching for is the promise that all men are created equal before God, that our nation was founded on that, and that we should have equal access to liberty and justice for all. Those statements that we all grew up saying, that those should mean something. America, as you know, was built on a promise of becoming something greater than the rest of the world, of being a great country. It was not ruled by a monarch or an oligarchy, that where justice and liberty would be available for everyone. And that in contrast to what was happening in Europe and what was happening in the other continents. And so when that promise is put out there and then it's snatched away, of course, there's going to be bitterness and there's going to be hurt. I mean, even the Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. When a promise is made, much of the 1960s marches and the civil rights protests was what was talked about. And you remember Martin Luther King talking about this on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, that this promise that was made 100 years before, that was broken, that still wasn't being put in place. And then you fast forward another 60 years on top of that there's still injustice. There's still all these race crimes happening against African Americans. Of course there's going to be anger. Of course. I mean, most people can tolerate justice for maybe about an hour, let alone a year or 5 years or a decade or a century or multiple centuries. And so there's a lot of emotion there. So my question is, when you look at this picture, which is equity? Everybody getting the same size box, even though some are tall, some are short? Or everybody getting the help they need so that everybody can see over the fence? And this is kind of what boils down the argument about affirmative action and helping minorities and or helping people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Really an argument and a discussion that happens all over the world. Here's the thing, and for me, really, of course, it's a race. There's a race implications here, but there's also economic implications of people who grew up in poverty or people who grew up in nations that are impoverished. If we took a closer look at those boxes that they're standing on, here's what we'd see. And those boxes that they stand on, that their lives stand on, have components. At the most basic is nutrition. The HOPE programs in South Africa are to help early childhood development because research has proven thoroughly that if a child doesn't get nutrition in its first 3 years of life, her brain literally will not develop properly. And therefore, the rest of their life, they will have a handicap. They will not be able to process things and learn and advance like all the other children, simply because they're malnourished. And this is not just in Africa. This has happened around the world, especially countries that endured long wars, where a generation grows up impoverished, even in places like Holland or in the Norwegian countries after World War II, or different in China, in different countries where a war ravaged the land and children were born in their first several years, they were raised. Studies show they have more health problems, they have more educational issues, they have all kinds of mental illness, all kinds of things that just explode because of it. So nutrition is incredibly important. Whether you're a kid growing up that you had a bowl of cereal and orange juice and toast and eggs or something like that in the morning, or you're a kid that just got rushed off to school and you didn't get anything, or you got a piece of bread or something, and your body wasn't being nourished with what it needed. So that does have an effect. Obviously, education, the quality of education. Did you go to school where people took their time? Or did you go to school where the classes were crowded and teachers were frustrated and that you didn't get the attention, you didn't get the education? I went to a lot of different schools. I went to about 21 different schools growing up. Some schools, all I needed to do was sit in the back and be quiet, and I would pass. And that's all they asked of me. And failing meant that you caused problems or got in fights or something. And then other schools I went to, the teacher took totally an interest in me and sat down and helped me out and helped me catch up. What a difference that made in my life. The resources we have, does your house have a computer? Do you have internet? Do you have access to the library? Do you those kind of things? Experiences did your family take you to museums? I sat around at my dinner table. My dad, who was a history buff, we'd talk about the Roman Empire and the Greeks and what they contributed to civilization. I know none of my friends talked about that stuff at their dinner tables. And that just planted seeds of curiosity and desire to learn in me. And alongside all of that is the nurturing, having somebody at home that is expressive. I love you, you're so cute, you're my favorite, whatever. The parents that were nurturing and loving and hugging and speaking words of affirmation, or parents that were never there and just didn't give you any feedback because they worked all the time. And they were gone all the time. Or when they did come home, they were exhausted and didn't feel like being giving. They sat down exhausted in front of the TV, vegged out for an hour, and went to bed and started the day all over again. That nurturing, again, has been proven through research, has a huge effect on your brain's development, on the development of synapses and all that your brain needs. It's not just nutrition, but it's also emotional nourishment, of culture. Do you have a culture of going to college? I'm the first in my family to graduate from a 4-year university. And, many families, especially poorer working class families, they don't value education so much. They value a good job. So I remember being discouraged about education. And a lot of this happens actually to a lot of Hispanic families that a kid wants to go to college, and it's like, why are you going to go add up debt? Just get a good job. And so the culture doesn't value that, or the culture value, you got to come up with some rent money now. So yeah, college is nice, but that's for the future. You got to get out there and do something right now to come up with rent money or buy food money. So those things, they all affect. And then of course there's opportunities. Do you get to be part of an SAT practice course? And do you have resources to be prepared for college? Is your school a college prep school, or is it a school just cranking kids through because it's overcrowded and underfunded? All those things affect how a person does in life. And that's before they're even legally adults. And so what their crate is made out of and how solid is that crate. And I haven't even talked about obstacles, language barriers, cultural barriers, SAT tests that have vocabulary that people of color don't use that vocabulary. They wouldn't understand that language. And find a synonym for this word. Never heard of that word in their life, and you say, well, why don't you go down to Barnes & Noble and buy one of those deck of flashcards and teach them all those words? That means you got to have money. That means you got to be familiar with Barnes & Noble. That means you got to know it's there. That means that you've got to have the time to study it. All those things come into play. And there can be many obstacles like that hold somebody back. And it's like running with leg weights on and a weight vest and your eyes blindfolded. And I don't care how strong you are, it's going to be hard for you to keep up with the rest of the kids. So that's really what equity is about, is setting those crates, trying to help with those crates so that every kid has a chance. And so the easier thing to do is just point at this little kid and say, well, he's just short and that's the way his people are. They're all short on education or short on intelligence, and not take into account all these other things that go into giving somebody a chance in life. So I hope that helps a little bit with the understanding of what why equity is such an important thing, to give people a chance when all things are equal. When all things are equal, people have the same resources, same education, same nourishment, same nutrition, all that. It doesn't divide along color or race or ethnicity or culture. There are people who are brilliant from every background. There are people who are outstanding from every background, from every culture, from every language. But the fact is, in some places, it's just a lot harder than other places. And that even happens in the United States, in the major cities and in small country towns and different places where there's just many more obstacles and equity is not there. So that's enough about that. But and then number 3, it weakens our love and our unity. I talked about why is this so important? Jesus prayed that the whole world would know that we're his disciples by our oneness, which is another way of saying unity, that we're in this together, that we love each other, that we're hanging together. I love what Paul said, and this scripture has been quoted a lot lately. 1 Corinthians 12:24, while our presentable parts need no special treatment, but God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. This is what I love about the church, and also what I feel like the church, what we're challenged by is just learning to love each other like this, and to really, if one part suffers, we all suffer. The scripture that I've been preaching over and over for the last 2 weeks has been John 11:35. I memorized it, shortest scripture in the Bible. Jesus wept. And that has been so important to me because it shows Jesus' commitment not only to helping Mary and Martha, and not only to raising up Lazarus from the dead, but to go there emotionally, to connect with them, to feel their pain, to share their pain with them, and even cry with them. I mean, that just shows an incredible heart of Jesus. And of course, in Hebrews 2, 3, and 4, we're explained how Jesus became just like us so he could suffer with us, so he could be compassionate and merciful to us. And there's a level of commitment that only comes from deep love. I mean, the best way we see it is a parent and a child. I mean, what will a parent not do for their kid? They will suffer anything. They will sacrifice everything. They will do whatever it takes to help their children. Because why? They love their children. And that kind of love is the kind of love that God shows us and has called us to have with each other. That if one of us suffers, we all suffer. We all care. We let nothing divide us. If somebody in the family is being abused, then that hurts all of us. If somebody in the family, and in this scenario, there's no if, it's absolutely happening. And I think this is what our challenge is to love each other that much that we feel the pain, that we carry it, and we help each other. And we do whatever we can to right the wrong. And I know, you say, well, you're talking about a huge global problem. What impact do we have? Well, we have a huge impact in our world. Maybe not the whole globe, maybe not the planet, but in our world we do. And definitely in the church. Definitely the church can be a place where we listen to each other, we help each other heal, we don't attack each other if we say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or seem angry or seem bitter, but we actually help each other with it as we all strive to be like Jesus and love one another. Number 4, it's important to God. It's important to God. In Leviticus 19:15, it says, "Do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly." This one's a lot harder to put into practice than we think. Because we can't help it. I mean, if the mayor of Los Angeles showed up at church Sunday, we'd all be tripping over ourselves to make sure he had a great seat, he was in a good spot, that he had a Bible, that somebody was guiding him through the service. It's, and there's a whole practical side that, of course, boy, could he do a lot for the church and even for Christianity. But on the other hand, Jesus says, how you treat one, you should treat everyone. So if a poor person shows up at our church service, we should treat them great. We should make sure they have a Bible, get them a good seat, make sure they've got water if they need it, guide them through the service. And it's really not so much don't treat the governor well as much as don't treat the poor person badly. And definitely because they're a different color or different language or a different background or a different ethnicity, that we don't treat them well or with excellence or with love. And that's on us. That's on us as the church, to grow in that kind of love and that kind of commitment. John 17, Jesus prayed this prayer. "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who believe in me through their message." That's us, the future Christians, basically, who he's praying about. "That all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me." It's very clear Jesus is calling us to a oneness with him. And, as radical as that is, I mean, being Jesus, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one. They're one. And they are inviting us to be one with them. And we have to be, and they challenge us to be one with each other as well. And that one, wow, that's major. That's radical. That is so different than everything. That is so different than everything in the world, than how the world operates, how the world thinks. And here's the tricky part. It doesn't happen just because we say, yeah, okay, I'll be one. because we have a past and we have issues and we have luggage and we have our cultural lenses and we bring with us our fears and our doubts and our hang-ups, you know, and all of us have it. And so we have to deal with that to be able to be one. And love has to grow because love covers a multitude of sins. It doesn't mean that you have to, you know, deal with every past hurt necessarily, but it does mean your love has to be able to cover that. And maybe, yes, maybe there's some past hurts that absolutely need healing, and we have to figure that out. But the calling is to be one. That means we go through whatever we got to go through, even though we're tempted to just say, forget it. Forget about it. It's too much hassle. It's too hard. Let me just go where everybody looks like me, sounds like me, talks like me, eats what I eat. That's way easier. Not really, because you'll have an issue with somebody in that group. And that group will divide up by skin tone or ethnicity or language or religion or something, because every group does. And then you have the same set of problems all over again. At some point, somebody's got to stop and say, nope, we're going to go there. And we're going to become one with Jesus and one with each other. Even though it's a painful process, we're going to do it. This is what God wants. Universal unity. And it's only from God. I'm telling you, it doesn't come from the world. You can bond people for one cause, one mission, a championship game. And that'll bond everybody together for a short time. Guaranteed. As soon as that's done, there goes the unity. We are not bonded to win a championship, to look good, and then we're bonded because we're going to spend eternity together. So we better like each other now. We better figure it out now and enjoy what we have. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And there's so much fun in that. There's such a glory in that. There's so much greatness in that. Our diversity, it's beautiful. It's fantastic. It's something to be celebrated, as we come from so many different backgrounds and cultures. And, you know what every one of those little faces represents? A different way of making rice. Every one of them cooks rice different. We all love rice, and rice is good. And whether it's white rice or rice pilaf or Mexican rice or Nigerian rice or arroz con gandules or congri or whatever it is, rice and peas. There's a lot of different ways. Fried rice. It's rice, and it's great. And that's what we are. We're the same and yet different. We're different flavors, but we're the same. And diversity, it's a very real thing, and it's a very powerful thing. Another class, another time, we'll look at the power of diversity. It beats talent. It beats experience. It beats education. It even beats expertise. And the business world is figuring this out and realizing that a business does much better if it has a diverse leadership team. They just do. Because you get all these different perspectives that help you win, that help you succeed. A group average is almost always better off than an individual average. And no individual is smarter than a group of smart people. It just doesn't happen. And lastly, you know, I love this picture. This is a Banksy. I have a big poster of this. I love it because that picture, that guy would typically be throwing a Molotov cocktail. That's one of those bottles that explodes on impact at a tank or at soldiers or at a building or something. But instead, he's got a bouquet of flowers. And that to me represents love and beauty. And the world's full of radicals for hatred, for anger. Radicals who are willing to lay down their lives for their hatred and for their anger. What the world needs is people who are radical for love. people who are willing to lay down their lives to spread the gospel of love, to spread the message of love. God said, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Help each other. Don't be silent. Don't do nothing. Stand up for each other. Be part of the solution. Spread the gospel of love. Spread the message of love. Let's change the world. Let's change the church. Let's help the church be that haven of love. Let's help our neighborhoods and our communities and our cities. Let's show them this as we learn to love each other and to be one in Jesus. I'll stop there. Thank you for joining us. I hope this has been educational and inspiring for you. If you'd like to know more, please join us by going to study.laicc.net, and we'll be happy to contact you and help you in any way we can.